baseline is what makes it matter. I use rideshare apps multiple times a week. I have been using them for years, in multiple cities, at all hours. I have a routine that I follow every time I get into a car. I check the license plate against the app before I open the door. I confirm the driver's name and photo. I sit behind the passenger seat rather than directly behind the driver, and I share my trip with a contact before the car moves. I do these things automatically, without thinking about them, because I built the habit early and never stopped. I am not careless about rideshare. I am, by any reasonable measure, exactly the kind of person who does everything right. What I am going to describe happened anyway. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. I had been at the office later than usual, a project deadline that had stretched the day past 9, and I was tired in the specific way of someone who has been staring at a screen for 12 hours and wants nothing except to be home. I requested a ride from outside the building. The car arrived within 4 minutes, plates matched, photo matched, driver confirmed his name when I got in. Everything correct. I got into the back seat, put my headphones in, and opened my phone to the trip-sharing screen to send my location to my roommate. We pulled away from the curb and I watched the route on my app. For the first several minutes it was normal, the car moving in the direction of my apartment, the blue line on the map tracking the expected path. Then we turned left where the app indicated we should go straight. I pulled one headphone out and looked up at the navigation on his phone mount. It showed a different route than what my app was displaying. I said the app was showing a different path. He said there was construction on the main road, that the alternate route was faster. I said okay and put my headphone back in and watched my app. We continued for another few minutes and the distance to my destination was increasing, not decreasing. I took both headphones out. We were heading east. My apartment was west. The distance counter on my app was at 2.3 miles and climbing. I said, without accusation, that the app was showing we were moving away from my destination. He said the construction detour went east before looping back around. I looked at the map. There was no loop. The road we were on ran straight east for several miles before the next major intersection. I said that and he said the app wasn't updated with the current detour information, that he drove this area every night, that he knew the roads. I kept my voice level. I said I'd like to go back to the original route. He said we were almost to the turn that would bring us back around. I looked at my app. We were 2.8 miles from my apartment and the number was still going up. I typed a message to my roommate with our current cross streets and sent it without looking like I was doing anything important. Then I opened the app and used the in-app contact function to send a message to driver support flagging the route deviation. My heart rate was up, but I was keeping my hands still and my voice even because I had read enough times that visible panic in that situation makes it worse. He took a turn that brought us partially back toward a main road. The distance began decreasing. He said, without turning around, that he was sorry about the confusion with the route, that the construction had changed the traffic patterns. I said that was fine. I watched the map until I recognized the streets outside and did not say anything else for the remainder of the drive. He pulled up in front of my building. I thanked him, got out, and walked inside without stopping. I sent a follow-up report to the platform the moment I was through my front door. The platform responded 2 days later. They told me, in careful language that disclosed as little as possible, that the driver's account had been flagged following my report and that they were reviewing his trip history. A customer service representative called me the following week. She told me, off the record in a specific way that means she knew it mattered to me but couldn't say it formally, that there had been a previous complaint from another city involving the same driver and a similar pattern of unexplained route deviation with a solo female passenger late at night. That complaint had not resulted in deactivation. Mine, combined with it, had. What I think about most is the distance counter climbing past 2.3, past 2.8, past 3.1 miles before I said anything the second time. I had said something at the first turn. I had accepted the construction explanation. I had put my headphone back in. That window, between the first turn and the moment I pulled both headphones out and stopped accepting explanations, is the window I replay most. Not because anything happened in it. Because it was the window in which something could have. I still use rideshare apps. I still check the plate and the photo and share my trip. But I watch the route map from the moment the car moves, and I do not accept route explanations more than once. One deviation with an explanation is possible. Two deviations with explanations is a pattern. That distinction is now built into how I travel. I also never put both headphones in anymore. One ear is always open. It costs me nothing and it means I hear everything. I want to add something about the construction explanation specifically, because it is the kind of explanation that is designed to be difficult to argue with in the moment. Construction detours are real. Traffic apps are not always current. Drivers who work a specific area every night do sometimes know things that a navigation app does not. All of that is true, and all of it is why the explanation works as long as it needs to work. It only needs to work for the duration of a car ride. It only needs to produce enough reasonable doubt that you don't push back hard, that you accept it once and then again, that you stay in the car past the point where the destination is still visible on the map. I think about the previous complaint, the one from the other city. I think about that passenger, someone I will never meet, who filed a report and was not believed enough to produce an immediate consequence. Her experience went into a file. My experience combined with it. It took two of us. That is the part of the system that I find most difficult to accept, and also the part that makes every report worth filing regardless of outcome. You might be the first. You might be the second. Either way, it goes into the file. I filed mine the moment I was inside. I would file it again. There is a version of that ride that I run sometimes, the version where I don't check the map. Where I have both headphones in and I'm tired and I'm not watching the counter, and the first turn happens and I don't notice, and the second happens and I don't notice, and we are several miles east of where I should be before I look up from my phone. I run that version because I think it is important to be honest about how close it is. I do not run it because I believe I would have done that. I run it because I know that tired, that late, with a deadline just finished and the specific exhaustion of a 12-hour day, the pull toward just getting home and not thinking about anything is very strong. The habit I had built was the thing that held. Not judgment in the moment. Habit. That is why I describe the routine in such detail when I tell the story. The plate check. The photo confirmation. The name confirmation. The back seat position. The shared location. Those things are not reactions to this incident. I had those things before this incident. I had them because someone had told me to, and because I had built them into every ride until they were automatic. What the incident added was the route monitoring and the one headphone rule and the single explanation limit. Those are the pieces I did not have and now have. The full routine takes approximately 90 seconds when I get into a rideshare. 90 seconds at the start of a ride. I have thought about what those 90 seconds cost me across a year of rides, and I have thought about what the alternative costs. The math is not complicated. I know the name of the cross streets where I sent my roommate that message. I could find them on a map right now. That is the level of detail at which that moment lives in my memory. Not just that I sent the message, but exactly where we were when I sent it, and what the distance counter said, and what the turn I was about to accept as an explanation would have looked like on the map. I sent the message. The distance counter was at 2.8. The turn did not loop back. Those are the three things I know with certainty from that night. Everything else I have filled in from what I was told afterward. But those three things I know because I was watching. One more thing. After the platform call, after I was told about the prior complaint, I looked up what I could find about route deviation incidents in rideshare contexts, not to frighten myself, but because I wanted to understand the pattern I had apparently been part of. What I found was that unexplained route deviation with solo passengers, particularly late at night, is one of the most commonly reported precursors to serious rideshare incidents. Not the most common incident itself. Most deviations are what drivers claim they are, traffic or road issues or genuine navigation errors. But when deviation is followed by resistance to correction, by continuing to move away from the destination after the passenger has asked to return, by escalating justifications, that sequence is a documented pattern. The construction explanation is common. Traffic is common. Local knowledge overriding the app is common. They are common because they are plausible and because plausible is all they need to be. I did not know any of that before that Tuesday in October. I know it now because of that Tuesday in October. I would prefer to have known it earlier, but I will take knowing it now over not knowing it at all. The distance counter was at 2.3 when I first noticed. I said something at 2.3. I accepted the explanation. I put my headphone back in. It was at 2.8 when I took both headphones out and stopped accepting. That 0.5 miles is the thing I carry. Not as regret, I got home. As information about how much distance a single accepted explanation can cover before the next one is required. I do not accept more than one now. I drove for a rideshare platform for almost 2 years. Night shifts mostly, starting around 9 in the evening and running until 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes later when the surge pricing made it worth staying out. I had done enough rides by the time this happened to have a reasonably accurate read on the range of passenger behavior, the drunk ones, the tired ones, the ones who wanted to talk and the ones who very much didn't, the ones who fell asleep and the ones who seemed like they might be sick before we reached the destination. I knew the patterns. I thought I knew what to watch for. What I want to describe is the one ride that didn't fit any pattern I had seen before, and the reason it didn't fit is that it wasn't really about the ride. It was a Friday night, just past midnight. The pickup was outside a bar in a moderately busy part of the city, normal for the hour, the kind of pickup I had done hundreds of times. One passenger, male, late 20s or early 30s. He got in, confirmed his name, and gave me his destination, which was a residential address about 12 minutes away. Everything normal. I pulled away from the curb and he was quiet for the first minute or two, looking at his phone. Then he started asking questions. Not conversationally, that happens, and the rhythm of casual conversation in a rideshare is something I recognized and was comfortable with. This was different. The questions were specific and they were building. He asked how long I had been driving for the platform. I said about 2 years. He asked what hours I usually worked. I said nights mostly. He asked what area of the city I covered and whether I usually worked alone. I said I covered the central area and yes, I worked alone, which is the nature of the job. Then he paused for a moment and asked whether I had a good memory for faces. I said I thought I did. He didn't say anything after that. I watched him in the rear view and he was looking out the window. I cataloged the conversation so far and did not like the shape of it but told myself it was probably nothing, late night, maybe a few drinks, just a person who asked unusual questions. I kept driving. We were about 6 minutes from his destination when he asked me to stop at an address that was not the one in the app. He said he needed to pick something up, that it would only take a minute. I pulled over at the address he gave, which was a residential block I didn't know well, dark, quieter than where we had come from. He got out and walked toward a building entrance and was gone for 8 minutes. 8 minutes is a long time to sit parked on an unfamiliar street at midnight. I sat with the engine running and thought about the conversation, the questions about my hours, my area, whether I worked alone. I thought about the question about faces. I thought about the fact that he had asked to stop at a location that wasn't in the app, which meant I had no record of being there. I looked at my dash cam, which I had installed 3 months earlier after a difficult ride, and felt better about it than I ever had before. He came back. He was not alone. There was a second person with him, a man I had not seen before, not in the app, not associated with the booking in any way. They both got in the back seat. I said, calmly, that I could only transport passengers who were registered in the app and that I'd need to end the trip if there was an additional passenger. The original passenger said his friend was just getting a ride, that it was a short distance, that it wasn't a big deal. The second person said nothing. He was looking at the back of my headrest. I ended the trip on the app. I said the ride was complete and that they would need to exit the vehicle. The original passenger said that was ridiculous, that they were almost at the destination, that I was being difficult. I kept my voice level and said I understood the inconvenience, but the trip was ended and they needed to get out. They got out. The original passenger stood on the sidewalk outside the car for almost 4 minutes after his companion had walked away. He was not on his phone. He was not looking at anything in particular. He was standing still, facing the car, in a way that I can only describe as waiting to see what I would do next. I drove away. I filed a report through the platform that night, documenting the stop, the unregistered passenger, and the questions about my hours and area and whether I worked alone. The platform flagged the account for review. 6 weeks later, a driver in the same city posted in a driver forum that I was part. He had picked up a passenger matching my description of him and had been asked the same sequence of questions, hours, area, whether he worked alone. The passenger had also asked for an unscheduled stop. That driver had not complied with the stop request. The passenger had become agitated and ended the ride himself. That driver's description matched mine well enough that the platform, when presented with both reports, deactivated the account. I think about the 8 minutes. About sitting parked on a street I didn't know, no record in the app of being there, engine running. About what was being arranged in that 8 minutes and what the second person was for. I don't know the answers. I know what the questions about my hours and my area and whether I worked alone were mapping. I know what kind of information you collect when you're building a picture of someone's vulnerability. I know that the dashcam was the variable he hadn't accounted for, and that if I hadn't had it, the report I filed would have been my word against his with no supporting documentation. I installed the dashcam 3 months earlier because someone had told me to. I hadn't experienced anything that made me think I needed it. I had it because the advice was good and because I followed it before I needed it rather than after. I don't take late-night rides to unfamiliar residential areas anymore. I don't accept unscheduled stops under any circumstances. I don't answer questions about my schedule or my coverage area or whether I work alone. And the dashcam has been running on every single ride since the day I installed it. I want to go back to the question about faces, because I have thought about it more than any other part of that conversation. He asked whether I had a good memory for faces right after I told him I worked alone. The sequence of those two things, you work alone, do you remember faces, is not a coincidence. It is a calibration. He was trying to establish how much of a liability I would be as a witness. A driver who doesn't work alone might have colleagues who could corroborate their account. A driver with a good memory for faces is a better witness than one without. These are the variables you care about if you are assessing how much of a problem someone represents after the fact. I did not understand that in the moment. I was processing the question as a slightly odd piece of conversation from a passenger who had been drinking. I answered honestly. I said yes, I thought I did have a good memory for faces, and then he went quiet and I thought the conversation had simply ended. I did not understand until much later, sitting in my car after filing the report, that the pause after my answer was him receiving information he had been looking for. The questions in sequence were, how long have you been driving? What hours do you work? What area do you cover? Do you work alone? Do you have a good memory for faces? That is a risk assessment. That is someone mapping the degree of exposure they would face if something went wrong and you were the driver. The level of methodicalness in those questions, the patience with which they were delivered in what sounded like casual conversation, is the thing I find most difficult to stop thinking about. He had done this before. Nobody asks those questions in that order on their first attempt at whatever he was attempting. The second person who got in the car said nothing during the entire exchange about ending the ride. He looked at the back of my headrest and waited. I have thought about his role many times. Was he there as a second presence to make the math harder for me, 2 people against 1? Was he there to do something specific once we reached the destination? Was he there because the original passenger needed someone to confirm what he had assessed about me before committing to the next step? I don't know. I know that he was collected during the 8 minutes, which means the 8 minutes were for collecting him, which means the stop was planned before we left the pickup location. The ride from the bar to the stop was approximately 6 minutes. He had already decided, before he got in my car, that he was going to ask for that stop. The questions about my hours and area and memory happened during those 6 minutes. He was running an assessment while building to the stop. The stop was where the assessment ended and the next phase was supposed to begin. It did not begin because I ended the trip and because they got out and because the original passenger standing on the sidewalk for 4 minutes staring at my car eventually turned and walked away. For minutes of standing there. I drove away after 90 seconds of sitting still, which means I did not see him walk away. I only know he eventually did because no one followed me and nothing happened afterward. I drove home that night and sat in my parked car outside my building for a while before going inside. Not because I was frightened, I was past the fear by then, running on something more analytical. I sat there because I was going over the questions again, putting them in order, understanding for the first time what order they were in. Hours. Area. Alone. Faces. I answered all four honestly and accurately. He got exactly what he was asking for. What he did not account for was the dash cam in the report and the driver form 6 weeks later. Hours. Area. Alone. Faces. I answer none of those questions anymore to a stranger in a car. Not because the answers changed. Because I understand now what they are for, and understanding that once is sufficient to make the habit permanent. My name is Reed and I travel for work. Not as frequently as some, but enough to have a rhythm to it, the same app, the same routine, the same way of getting from airports to hotels in cities I don't know. I use Rideshare almost exclusively when I travel because it's faster than a taxi and I don't have to explain where I'm going to a dispatcher. The driver knows the destination before I get in the car. The route is tracked. It should be, by any measure, one of the more transparent forms of transportation available. What I'm going to describe made me understand that the transparency runs in more than one direction. This was a work trip, a city I had been to twice before for similar purposes. I landed late, just past 11, and requested a ride from the arrivals hall to the hotel where I had a reservation. 40-minute drive. Unremarkable pickup. The car was there when the app said it would be. I confirmed the driver and got in. He was in his 40s, professional, quiet at first. The kind of driver I prefer, someone who doesn't feel the need to fill the silence. We were about 10 minutes into the drive when he mentioned my company. He said it casually, the way you mention something you already know. Not a question, a statement. He said something like, "You're here for work with that company, right?" And he named it. The correct name, the full name, the company I worked for. I said yes, as though it were a normal thing for him to know, while I processed the fact that it was not a normal thing for him to know. My name was in the app. My destination was a hotel. Nothing in my profile listed my employer. I had not said anything about work since getting in the car. I was in business casual clothes that did not have a company logo. There was nothing about me that should have told him where I worked. I said, as neutrally as I could, "How did you know that?" He said something vague, that he had driven people from that company before, that he recognized the hotel as one they used. It was an explanation that almost worked. The hotel I was booked at was not a corporate property. It was a general business hotel that any traveler might use. I filed that away and said nothing more about it. Then, about 5 minutes later, he mentioned the city I had flown in from. Again, correctly. Again, casually. Again, not as a question. I asked him how he knew that. He said the flight arrival times gave him a general idea. That was not true. The app shows pickup location, not origin flight. I had not told him my departure city. My boarding pass was in my jacket pocket. Nothing visible should have told him where I had come from. I kept my voice completely even. I asked whether drivers had access to passenger profile information beyond the name and rating. He said no, just the name and rating in the destination. He said it smoothly and then changed the subject to ask whether it was my first time in the city. I said I had been here before, answered his next two questions briefly, and then stopped engaging and looked at my phone for the remainder of the drive. When we arrived at the hotel, I thanked him, went inside, and immediately filed a detailed report through the app documenting both the company name and the origin city. The platform's response came 4 days later. It was careful in the way that corporate communications are careful when they are confirming something they would prefer not to confirm. They told me that upon reviewing the account they had found that the driver had accessed passenger profile data in a manner inconsistent with driver permissions and that the account had been suspended pending further review. They did not tell me what he had accessed or how. They did not tell me how many other passengers had been affected. I called the support line and spoke to someone who was more forthcoming off the formal channel. She told me that the driver had found a method of accessing extended passenger profile data, employer information, frequent travel patterns, home city, that was not supposed to be visible to drivers. She could not tell me how he had done it or what he had been doing with the information. I want to be precise about what the information means in combination. My name, my employer, my home city, my travel patterns inferred from frequency, my current hotel. That combination is not a trivial data set. That is enough to know who I am, where I work, where I live, and where I am right now. In the context of a 40-minute drive to a hotel in a city I don't know, alone in the back of a car, that combination of information belonging to the driver is not something I had thought to assess as a risk before that night. I review my data permissions on every app one uses now. Not occasionally, every time there is an update, because updates sometimes reset permissions or introduce new ones. I do not have my employer listed on any travel or rideshare profile. I use a first name and last initial rather than my full name where the platform allows it. I do not mention my employer, my home city, or my travel history in conversation with any driver. The number of rides I had taken before that one, in that city and others, with my full profile visible and my employer listed and my travel patterns recorded, I try not to think about that number. I think about the next one instead, and what it looks like now that the settings have changed. I want to describe what it felt like to be in that car in the specific moments after each revelation, because I think the felt experience is the part that is hardest to convey and also the part that explains the behavior that followed. When he said the company name, my first response was not alarm. It was a kind of cognitive dissonance, the smooth, almost automatic social reflex of yes, that's right, while a separate process in the background was flagging that something did not fit. The foreground and background were running at the same time and the foreground was faster. By the time the background process had finished flagging the discrepancy, I had already confirmed the information and moved past it. That lag is not stupidity. It is the way social interaction works. You respond to the surface while the deeper assessment catches up. By the time he said the home city, the background process had caught up. I was no longer running both tracks in parallel. I was running one track, which was, this man has information about me that he should not have, and I am 40 minutes from where I started in a city I do not know, and I am alone in his car. I want to be specific about what I did with that assessment in real time, because I think it matters. I did not panic. I did not confront him. I did not demand to get out. I asked a factual question, how did he know my origin city, in a tone that was as neutral as I could make it, because I had understood by that point that the most important thing was to not change the temperature of the situation. Whatever he was doing with the information he had, an agitated passenger was not likely to improve it. A calm passenger who did not reveal how much they had understood was the safest thing to be. He gave me an answer that did not hold together. I accepted it and disengaged from the conversation and did not give him anything else for the remaining 25 minutes. When we arrived at the hotel, I thanked him in exactly the tone I would have used if nothing had happened and went inside. I filed the report from my hotel room. Then I changed my check-in to a different hotel using the business account's backup option, which I had never used before. I do not know if changing hotels was necessary. What I know is that he had my original hotel name and I did not want to spend the night in a room he knew the name of, and changing it cost me nothing except 20 minutes of administration. The platform's response confirmed what I had already concluded. The information came from the account, not from observation. He had found a way into data he was not supposed to have. The specificity of what he said, the company name, the origin city, required more than inference from visible cues. He had accessed something. I think about the combination of information often. Name, employer, origin city, current hotel. That is a set of coordinates. Not a physical location in one moment, but a pattern of movement with a home point attached. That is the kind of information that has value beyond a single car ride. I don't know what value he was extracting from it or why. I know the account was suspended, which means I was not the only complaint, which means other passengers had data accessed and some of them had flagged it and some of them had not noticed. I am one of the ones who noticed. I noticed because he was careless enough to use the information in conversation. A more careful person would have accessed it silently, and I would have arrived at my hotel never knowing the ride had been anything other than ordinary. That is the version of this story that happens to most people who are affected by it. The version where nothing visible goes wrong and the information is simply taken and used for purposes the passenger never learns about. I got the version where he said it out loud and I was alert enough to register it. I do not consider myself lucky for that. I consider it instructive. Review your app permissions. Not once. Every update. Check what your profile shows to drivers and reduce it to the minimum the platform requires. Your name is enough. Your employer and home city and travel history are not required for a car to take you from an airport to a hotel. They should not be there. One last thing about the hotel number. When we pulled up and I got out, he said have a good stay. That part was ordinary. What was not ordinary was that he said it and then, as I was walking toward the entrance, he said the room number. Not the hotel name, the room number of the reservation I had made before the flight, on my phone, through the hotel's app, which was linked through corporate travel to my employer profile. He said it the same way he had said the company name and the origin city. Casually. As information he had and saw no reason not to use. I did not turn around. I went inside and changed hotels. The room number was correct.